welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the world of the Cathars, a group shrouded in mystery and intrigue.
Yeah.
You've been researching their history, and I have to say, it's a story that pulls you in.
It really does.
With its sheer drama. I mean, these are people who considered themselves good Christians.
Right.
But they were brutally persecuted by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Thousands were killed, hanged, burned, all for their beliefs.
Yeah.
What made the Cathars so threatening?
It's a great question. You know, the Cathars, they thrived between the 12th and 14th centuries.
Okay.
Mainly in southern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And they gained a significant following, even challenging the church's authority in some places. And yet, within a few hundred years, they were virtually wiped out.
It's really like a historical mystery novel when you think about it.
It really is.
And speaking of mysteries, their beliefs almost seem paradoxical at first glance.
They do.
I'm really curious about this idea of dualism that you highlighted in your notes.
Right.
You know, our source, Catharism.pdf,
Right.
dives into this concept of two gods, good versus evil, locked in this epic cosmic struggle. Can you unpack that a bit more for us? How did the Cathars reconcile this with their Christian identity?
Yeah, absolutely. This dualism was central to their belief system. They believed in two principles. One good, representing the spiritual realm, and one evil, associated with the material world. Now, while this might sound like a radical departure from Christianity, it actually has roots in these earlier Gnostic traditions that the church had already deemed heretical.
Oh, wow.
The Cathars saw themselves as upholding the true teachings of Christ, believing that the church had strayed from his original message.
So they weren't rejecting Christianity outright.
Right.
They saw themselves as restoring it to its, pure form.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. And this ties into their belief in reincarnation as well, right?
Exactly. They believed that our souls were actually angelic beings trapped in this cycle of death and rebirth, within this material world that they saw as corrupt and controlled by the evil principle.
Okay.
Salvation for the Cathars meant breaking free from this cycle and returning to that spiritual realm.
Which explains why they adopted such an austere lifestyle, as details in the source.
Yeah.
No meat, no sex. It was all about rejecting the material world and its temptation.
Right, exactly.
But if they were all about peace and spiritual enlightenment, why were they seen as such a threat? I mean, they weren't exactly staging armed revolts or anything.
Well, you've hit on a really crucial point, and that is that while their lifestyle might have seemed harmless enough, their beliefs challenged the very foundation of the church's authority. The Cathars rejected the sacraments, the priesthood, even the significance of the cross. They claimed this direct line to God.
Oh, wow.
Undermining the church's entire role as the intermediary.
And in medieval Europe, where the church held immense power.
Oh, absolutely.
Both spiritual and political.
Yeah.
That was a dangerous game to play.
It was a dangerous game. And their rejection of the church's hierarchy combined with their growing popularity really set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in their history, the Albigensian Crusade.
And this is where things take a really dark turn.
Yes.
It wasn't just a theological debate anymore. This escalated into a full-blown war.
It did.
Our source describes the massacre at Béziers in chilling detail, with thousands slaughtered. It's just a stark reminder of the human cost of religious intolerance.
It wasn't just Béziers, though. The Albigensian Crusade raged for decades.
Yeah.
The siege of Montségur, where hundreds of Cathars chose death over renouncing their faith, is another just harrowing example.
It's hard to fathom that level of devotion, that willingness to die for your beliefs. It makes you wonder, what drove that level of commitment? Was it purely about spiritual conviction, or were there other factors at play? You know, our source mentions that the Cathars had attracted followers from various social classes, including some nobles.
That's right. And that's a great observation, because while the church painted them as heretics, the Cathars were often seen as more morally upright than the clergy of the time, who were often perceived as corrupt and power-hungry.
Yeah.
Their message of spiritual purity and rejection of material wealth resonated with many people who were disillusioned with the church.
So there was more to it than just religious dogma.
Yeah.
It seems like the Cathars became a focal point for various forms of dissent.
Yeah.
A challenge to the established order.
Absolutely. And I think that's perhaps why their story continues to fascinate us even centuries later.
Absolutely. And speaking of enduring mysteries, Let's talk about the debate surrounding their organization. You mentioned this in your notes that this particularly interested you. Our source, Catharism.pdf, delves into this, even mentioning that some scholars question whether they existed as a unified religion at all.
It's a question that has haunted Cathar studies for a very long time. And I think part of the issue is that so much of what we know comes from the records of their persecutors, not exactly the most objective source.
Right.
So it makes it very difficult to separate fact from propaganda.
That makes sense. So what are the arguments on both sides of this debate? What evidence supports the idea of an organized Cathar church?
Well, some scholars point to the evidence of specific rituals, like the consolamentum, which was the sort of baptism ceremony that's described in some texts.
Okay.
There's also mention of different levels within the Cathar community, with the perfects acting as spiritual guides.
Yeah.
So these details suggest at least some level of structure and organization.
Okay. And what about the other side? What leads some to believe that the Cathar threat might have been exaggerated, even fabricated by the church?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the source actually touches on this, suggesting that the church might have lumped together various dissenting beliefs under the umbrella label of Cathar to create a more tangible enemy, you know? Mm-hmm. If you want to discredit something, it's much easier if you can give it a name and a face.
So it's possible that the church used the specter of a unified, organized heresy to solidify its power and justify its actions.
That's definitely possible.
That raises some unsettling questions about how narratives are shaped, especially in times of conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It really reminds us of the importance of critical thinking when we approach historical narratives, especially those where the victors get to, write the history books, as they say.
For sure. It's like trying to solve a historical puzzle,
right,
where some of the pieces might be missing, or even deliberately misplaced.
Yeah.
But that just adds to the intrigue, doesn't it?
It really does.
Speaking of intrigue, let's talk about the legacy of the Cathars.
Yeah.
Despite their persecution, they've really captured the imaginations of so many, even today.
Yeah.
There's an area in France known as Cathar country.
Right.
Dotted with these castles and ruins that just whisper tales of their past.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole legend of the Cathar treasure.
Right.
Did something survive? A secret doctrine, a hidden relic.
It's a question that has fueled countless theories and treasure hunts over the centuries.
Right.
Our source even mentions this, highlighting that enduring fascination with this possibility that something, tangible from the Cathars might have survived.
It's like something out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Uh-huh.
Only with ancient manuscripts instead of like a lost ark. But even if we never find a physical treasure, their story itself feels like a discovery.
It really does. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And, their story extends beyond just historical records, too. The Cathars have inspired artists, musicians, writers for centuries.
Right.
The Loboyer song, for example, is believed to have Cathar origins. This mournful melody kind of echoing the loss and longing of a persecuted people.
As we've been unpacking all of this, I keep thinking about this idea of heresy. It's a powerful label, often used to silence dissent and brand certain groups as other.
Mm.
Do you think we still see this kind of labeling today?
That's a great question. And I think it's a very insightful one. And I think while we might not use the term heresy as explicitly today,
right,
the underlying dynamic of, labeling and othering those with different views than us is still very much present in our world today.
Yeah.
Think about how certain groups are demonized in the media or in political discourse.
Right.
The language might be different, but the tactic of creating fear and division, I think, remains the same.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But an important one to consider. It makes you realize that history isn't just about dates and facts. It's about understanding how narratives are constructed.
Yep.
And how they continue to shape our world today.
And I think that's what makes, studying history so fascinating and so important, is that it allows us that lens, to look at our own world in a new way.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, a deep dive into the world of the Cathars, leaving us with more to ponder than when we started. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and remember, history is never truly over. It's still being written.